Welcome to Oppsell, where top sales legends reveal the playbooks they hardly ever share. With your host, Wilson DK,
Sales solution experts. It's real talk, real strategy.
and it's starting now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Oppsell Podcast. Our guest today is Olaoluwa Ayesa, a global growth strategist who's driven $100 million plus in revenue for startups across the EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East, and Asia, and Africa as well, and North America. And as an associate VP of growth, Ola sits at the crossroads of products, marketing, and sales, turning data into playbooks that land anchor customers and scale repeatable revenue engines. He mentors rising sellers, he bridges compliance hurdles across African markets, and sparks open commerce adoption everywhere he goes. If you want the inside track on building pipelines that compound and teams that outperform, stay tuned. Hi, Ola. Welcome to the Oppsell Podcast.
Hi, Wilson. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, yes, please introduce yourself again. I know I've given an overview of what you've done, but just let the audience know more about you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and hello to everyone listening to us from all across the world. My name is Olaoluwa, but I prefer to be called Ola. And just as Wilson had mentioned, I have over 15 years experience working across marketing, sales, and also business development. And I have also been able to find myself working very closely, leading sales and marketing teams in the past, driving go-to-market adoption, also leading execution of our go-to-market plans. I've led a couple of product initiatives that we took to market. I've also been able to lead teams across research, marketing, sales, seeing how we can use data to take very informed business decision. I've worked very closely in terms of sales enablement, helping to create marketing collaterals that were also very useful in engaging with customers. I think I would also speak to saying I've worked across content and digital marketing strategy. I've also worked in product strategy. I've also been very involved in marketing analytics and also event strategy, as well as marketing automation and using the CRM. So thank you so much again. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, it's a good one to have you over. And wow, you have the resume that spans across the important facets, the focal points of sales, marketing, front end, content creation, product growth, all the works, right? I like to see like an all-rounder. You have the experience. So, I mean, having this conversation, I'm sure we'll be having quality feedback and quality responses based off of the experiences that you've garnered over the years.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's get into it. Let's look at it from a global growth lens. Yeah, like you rightly said, you've led marketing, tech sales, and product growth programs, and you have generated lots of money across the startup revenue to the tune of over $100 million across EMEA and North Africa. And North America, I beg your pardon. What frameworks do you use to decide where and how fast to scale next, based off of what you've seen, based off of the experiences that you've garnered over the period of your career?
Thank you so much. I think that's a very good question. And usually when we are looking at frameworks to determine where do we go and how do we scale fast, one of the most fundamental piece is always what we call the TAM, SAM, SUM validation, which is looking at your total addressable market, your serviceable addressable market, and your serviceable obtainable market. Now, what this does for us is it usually allows us to be able to say what's the entire market size. And of this market size, who are the people that ideally should be buying from us or ideally should be using our product? And I can take a product commodity, for example, to say, looking at a country like Nigeria, to say over 200 million people. I think the stats is saying about 210 as of today. So looking at the market of 210 million people rather, and you're trying to sell maybe a toothpaste brand, for instance, everybody would most likely brush their teeth on a daily basis. However, we know that the buyers are not going to be everybody, because we also have a population of people that are 18 and below, as the largest population, accounting for about 60 to 65% of the population.
Yes.
So you're also looking at who should I be targeting in terms of who's going to buy my product, or who are the people that will buy my product. So as much as the 200 million people are going to use toothpaste brands of different kinds, you're also trying to say, of these 200 million people, I think I should just be targeting maybe the 60 million or the 40 million or 100 million people. Now, of these 100 million people, I'm also asking myself, there are existing competing brands that are already in the market. Am I coming in as a close substitute, as a market challenger? Do I want to become a disruptor? These are the things you now start to look out to say, of these 100 million people, how many of them am I able to obtain? Some of them are going to switch brands based on pricing, based on quality. So you now start to say, who are the people I really want to target? And that takes us to what we call the ICP validation, where you're now building a persona around who is my buyer. And people would build ICPs based on demographic ICPs, or they're doing based on demographic. Now, if you're targeting organizations, which is what tech sales is really all about, you're starting to look at what's the revenue size of the companies I'm trying to target, what's the total number of employees they've got, how many products are they currently serving, in what categories are they operating, what's the level of technology adoption within these organizations. So these are like the very base that you need to build if you're trying to get into any new market and trying to see how quickly you can scale. You're also trying to see in terms of market readiness and also the product fit of your product. So usually people are trying to force products into places where the market is not ready for. And I've seen this many times working in the East African market, where we're trying to get into a market where in terms of the infrastructure or the digital penetration, the market is not there yet. And you're trying by all means to get into those markets. It could also be based on your economic indicators. You're looking at the average growth rate of the country in terms of the economic growth, and your products would need to scale if it's a hyper growth and hyper scaling product. You also need to be checking how well does this product fit what exactly we're trying to sell. I also speak to the messaging, because that is also very important. After you've checked your serviceable, addressable, and serviceable obtainable market, you've built your ICP, you're also asking yourself, what is the need for this market? And that's where you try to do your product and market fit. But much more important is a place of your value proposition. What exactly am I trying to sell here? What exactly am I communicating to my audience? You need to be communicating based on need and how your problem is solving how your product rather is solving their problems. Because people don't buy product, people buy solution. So what exactly is your product going to be helping them to do? Then you're also checking what is your sales and marketing channels and how effective is it? Do you need to start to build, or are you going to adopt something that is already scalable in the markets where you're going into? And last but not the least, I'm also asking myself every single time, there is the customer acquisition cost. And this comes from what's my investment in this market right now? So how much am I investing? What is it going to cost me to acquire a customer? And I'm looking at the long-term customer acquisition cost. So for example, you close a deal and it's just maybe $1 million, it's just $1 million, for example. And then the business is saying, oh, we're expecting you to do maybe $10 million on this account. What we want to check first is how much did it even cost you to acquire this account? If it's an account that it took you maybe $10,000 or $50,000 to acquire, I already know from the $1 million what's going to be like my revenue or my profit on that account. And I'm checking on the lifetime value. Am I able to now upsell within this account? I'm able to cross-sell within this account. So I'm checking my acquisition cost. I'm looking at my payback period. So if I'm making this investment into a market, how long is it really going to take me to be able to recoup my investment? Sometimes these investments, we call them sunk costs, because you put it there, it never comes back to you. But you're looking at your customer acquisition cost. You're looking at your lifetime value ratio, which is how much I'm going to make from this customer today on the long term, and how much is this going to take me to bring my payback into it. So these are like the frameworks I usually will look at. I look at my addressable market, obtainable market. I validate my ICP. I'm looking at my product market fit in terms of the market readiness. I'm also looking at the velocity rate. How long will it take me to be able to penetrate this market? So what do I need to do? So do I need to do some activations? Do I need to run digital campaigns? Do I need to create brand awareness? So I look at all of these things before I then decide this is where I want to go, and this is how fast I want to scale. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. This is quite elaborate, and you touched on the salient points. You did mention the obtainable markets, addressable markets. It's also important that once you have seen the addressable market, you have to get and be realistic with your obtainable markets, and tunnel further to the ICPs, who are the ideal customers that you want to be targeting and the product you are trying to build is for. And if your product is a painkiller and not a vitamin, can they live without it?
Correct.
And can they live or can they not live without it? So those are the questions. And thank you for bringing that in, because it's also important that people understand that you have to tunnel through, even when you've gotten your market size, your market understanding. It's imperative that you have to validate your use case with the customer profiles, the personas, and ensure that your product is not a vitamin, it's a painkiller. So thank you for going deep into that and then giving us that detailed explanation.
Thank you, Wilson.
Yeah, sure. So let's move in a bit, and we're looking at building reputable revenue engines. So the question I'd like to ask here is, because you've coached sales teams for a large number of years, at least over 5-6 years, what are the top leading indicators that you track weekly to predict quarter-end outcomes? So how do you know when you're going to coast, and how do you know when you're going to fall short, based off your experience?
Okay, thank you for that very interesting question, Wilson. So I know when I was talking about the introduction, I didn't really speak to the things I've done and the places I've worked, but I was once a head of sales and marketing at a company called Oppsell. I was also country manager at a company called Helium Health, focusing majorly on the healthcare, on the healthcare sector, and using technology to disrupt that sector. And within those two roles, I was leading the sales team. So when I was at Oppsell, I had a sales team. I also had a sales team also at Helium Health. And so looking to the revenue engine conversation that you just spoke about, and asking what indicators that we will track either weekly or quarterly, I think one of the first things is I'm first checking what I call my pipeline coverage ratio. And what this does for me is it helps me to predict where we are going to be, if we are going to be hitting our revenue targets or not. And usually it's very easy for me to know. If I look at opportunities in what we call stage 5, in most cases, looking at many CRMs, stage 5 conversations you are at the commercial stage where you're talking about signing the contract, finalizing the pricing, or you're trying to either get the LPO out. That's usually the last stage of the conversation where it's close to a deal being won. That is the most predictable indicator to know if this current month or the coming few months, you're going to be able to meet your target. But if you're looking at the long term, I'm looking at my entire sales pipeline. So how many opportunities should I have at the very early stages, which is the prospecting? And prospecting is real deal to long-term forecast, which could be like a end of quarter or a end of an half year. So you're looking maybe like H1 or H2, but I'm looking at 6 months down the line. Do I have enough opportunities in the pipeline today? And that tells me if my salespeople are really engaging with more prospects. It also tells me if marketing is bringing in a lot of opportunities for us, because marketing should be generating the leads and sales should also be generating their leads. And in some organizations, it's a mix of both. In some organizations, it's just marketing generating the leads. We want to see how many MQLs are we really bringing on board, because MQL should be at least 3x, sometimes I say 6x of your pipeline coverage ratio. So if I want to do a 10 million revenue or a 100 million revenue in 6 months' time, I should be looking at a pipeline of maybe about 300 to 600 million, because we know not all of them are going to convert. So that's number one. I'm also checking what I call the velocity rate. How quickly are these opportunities converting? And that's why it's good to always have CRM tools within organizations, because it helps you to be able to track what we call opportunity age. How many days are these opportunities staying in the pipeline? I, for one, have a rule to say if an opportunity stays more than 90 days and it is not at the closure rate or closure stage, rather, if it's maybe we are still trying to assess an opportunity and it is taking you 90 days to assess if there's an opportunity there. So that's going to be between a sales qualified lead and an opportunity, and you've accepted it that there's an opportunity and it's taking you 90 days. I, as a person, I have a rule to say you move that opportunity back to stage 1, which is you need to go back and prospect. Because in my head, I'm asking myself, are you talking to the right person? Is this person a decision maker? Do they have the budget? Is there a need? Because if you cannot validate these 4 things, then it means that you are either not talking to the right person, or there's a multi-stakeholder engagement involvement that is required, and you're not able to get that done. So I take it back to stage 1. So I check the velocity rates of my opportunities in the pipeline. And first thing I said is that I also check very stage 1 to see we should have at least 3 to 6x of the coverage that we expect to have. And then I'm also checking the velocity rate. And then I'm also checking what's my conversion rate. So from a sales accepted lead to an opportunity, the industry benchmark says it's between 3 to 10%, depending on the kind of industry or sector that you're operating in. But for a fact, I always say it should be at least 5% at the very minimum. So I'm also trying to see, is this helping us to know how much MQLs we should be generating? Because if we are going to convert just 5% of the sales accepted leads to opportunities, then marketing should be generating a lot more MQLs for us. So for me, it's about real-time creating the scenario, looking at my top funnel velocity, looking at the bottom of my funnel. So I look at the top of the funnel, I look at the bottom of the funnel. I want to be generating more opportunities or more leads at the top of the funnel. And so to be sure that I'm not flying blind, because if I'm making my forecast, I'm looking at opportunities in the CRM as of today. And I'm also asking myself, how much more opportunities should we be generating to really be able to forecast that we are going to get there? So what's the average sales velocity? I'm checking that by segments. In some cases, I'm checking my sales accepted leads to the opportunity conversion rate. I'm checking the opportunity age for each of the opportunities. And I'm usually very, very particular about the opportunities in the middle of the funnel, because those ones are going to either move onto a deal size, or it's going to move on to maybe a closed lot, or I'm moving it back to the beginning of the funnel. So those are like the things, the indicators I'm looking out for. So I say long term, I'm also looking at short term. So I'm using my microscope to look very deep into each of the deals and each of the funnel stages. I'm also looking long term to say, do I have enough leads at the beginning, top of the funnel to feed me for the end of my projections? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what you said is also spot on. Is like, I always believe in the law of averages. You need to get as many qualified leads in the start of the pipeline at the beginning, because that way, once there is a problem, once there is a lack of leads or lack of leads in the velocity, you want them to be entering the pipeline at the start. It literally means that you are in danger. Even if you have like 2, 3, 4, 5 qualified leads or leads leading to closure or negotiations, because things could fall by the wayside. So that's why it's important that, from the top of it, getting, like you rightly said, it's 5% conversion most of the time. So imagine if, it's just 5% out of 600 leads or 500 leads or 1,000 leads, just 5% get past to the deal closure stage. So it's important that you keep loading up your leads, and not just loading up leads with non-qualified leads or non-qualified prospects. It has to be qualified. So that's where the work comes in. So it's imperative that starts. The quality of leads that come in and the velocity and the amount of leads that come in and the speed in which they come in is very important, like you rightly said. So it can't be overstressed enough. One part that I like that you said is, those are the middle, that sits in the middle of the sales journey, because many a times salespeople could be complacent, and not focus on that. Either focus on the guys at the end of the pipe funnel, or those at the start of the funnel. But the guys at the middle are the ones that if you don't hold them properly, or if you don't manage them properly, they could slip back. So the energy is to make sure that as you are focusing on the funnel, both ends of the funnel, you also have to focus on the guys in between, the leads in between, so to ensure that they are moving as they should move. The age is also very important, because you need to ensure that, like, I like your rule, 90 days is cool, because 90 days should be the standard. I do not see why salespeople should spend over 90 days, and the leads are not moving through the funnel. It's either you are speaking to the wrong person, or it's either, there's a lot of things. You've not identified the use case, you've not validated the use case. The customers may not even understand what value it is that you are bringing to the table. So these indicators are quite solid, and I'm sure if people do listen to this, they would get out of that, those slippery slopes, the slippery slope that they get to see when when you are stuck, or you can't understand why your sales team members are not getting onto it, not getting deals across the finish line. It's important that you have this review as frequent as possible,
Yeah.
so that if there are ideologies or there are things that are not doing properly, they're not being done properly, then you nip it in the bud real quick and start afresh, or make sure that it doesn't become a hazard by the end of the quarter, end of the financial year. So
So one
yeah,
other thing we do, sorry
go ahead. Yeah.
that when we have our review meetings, especially these guys at the stage 3, stage 4 of the funnel, if you've
Yeah.
gotten to the point where a contract has been sent out, a proposal has been sent, a demo has been done, you're already trying to scope the value of the deal, I'm very okay, because it's a sign that there is an opportunity. We are clear that we have a problem to solve for this client. It could then be maybe a pricing issue. But if it's stuck at the middle of a funnel, one of the things I'm also checking out for again is, are you having meetings? Are you documenting the feedback from your meetings? Because that's the whole idea of having a CRM tool to use. How many meetings have you had? How many calls have you had? How many notes are you also putting in within the CRM? And one interesting thing we also do is we swap phones. So we swap phone numbers. In those meetings is always very intense, because my job as revenue leader is not to just have a pipeline. My job is to bring the money to the table. Finance must tell us the money has hit the account. So at that point, we are saying, okay, this person is not taking your call, or you're not moving forward. Somebody else on the team is saying, okay, give me the number. And then this person is calling over to say, hey, this so person's manager. And I understand that we've been talking to you for quite a while. We've not been able to get a call. We've not been able to get a meeting. Are you open to a call next week? So we are pushing for definite timelines to say, let's get the meeting booked. Let's get the conversation moving forward. That's the point where we are validating, is there really something here for us? If the person is very nonchalant or is very offish, then we take those decisions to say, this fails, let's move them back. Let's go and start all over again. There is something wrong in the way we approach. It could be the value proposition, or they don't even have a need for it. If they don't have a need, let's disqualify, because it goes back to stage 1. So those are some of the other things we also do. We exchange the phone numbers, we call, and then we see that it always helps us to move those opportunities further down the line. And it's always very interesting, because it could just be that there's a skill set, or there's a language barrier in some cases, where there are multiple ethnic languages in some places, and somebody just switches, and then there's a code switch, and then everything just falls through. It just falls through, and you start to see that there's progress. And it could just be maybe that person's skills in pushing that isn't there as well. So it also tells us that it's good as a sales leader to have composition of different kind of skill sets on your sales team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something that also resonates. You always have that old trick off the book. Swap phone numbers, swap contacts, or swap numbers and swap leads, because like you said, the code switch could move the needle for you. I've had situations in the past where I was trying to reach out to someone, and the person was not getting through to me, and I had to talk to my manager. I said, hey, you know what, let me have a chat. And we spoke up with the person, and voila, it moved on again. So that is something that is tried, tested, and I'm sure that many people will learn from that and try to adopt that. It's also important to do that. Above and beyond that, even being a code switch, it also enables you to understand if this guy, that's the prospect, is being completely honest, or with the intentions to move forward. When someone else speaks, to say, hey, you know what, I'm not interested. You get that, and it saves everybody time. And like you said, you take it down the pipeline to disqualify the lead, or just say that, look, these guys are not ready. They don't understand they don't understand the use case. They don't understand what it is that you're trying to portray or present to them. So those are good points as well. Thanks for that. And let's move on again. Let's talk about navigating complexities in the African market. And this is because you're well versed in this ecosystem, especially moving from different sectors. You are the pharmaceuticals with Sproxil, and of course you moved into fintech, open commerce with Red Cloud. But one thing is certain: regulations have always been a moving target, right?
Yeah.
So what's your playbook for aligning growth goals with the compliance realities across multiple African jurisdictions? Remember, Africa is like a huge country with 54 jurisdictions, like I like to say. So what's your strategy aligning your growth with the compliance challenges?
Okay, thanks. This topic is dear to my heart, but it's also a very complex conversation to have. Because I've worked in over 5 African markets, now 6 or 7, based on my entire career, and I've had to work with different kinds of regulators. So in Angola, I was working with Inacom, which is like the regulator for the telecoms industry. At some points, I've worked with the PPB, which is like the Pharmacy and Poisons Board in Kenya. I've worked with NAFDAC. I've worked with SON, which is like a standard organization of Nigeria. I've worked with some guys who are responsible for fair play, for competitive consumer protection. So across different markets, I've had to work with different regulators. And for me, I think the playbook would be, how do you align your growth goals with the realities of each of your markets? And for example, I'm going to say each ministry will determine, and maybe I should just backtrack for a minute to say, we also need to understand why these regulators also exist, because people must first understand what's the role of regulators, whether it's in the fintech industry, where they're trying to avoid maybe systemic risk, or they're just trying to ensure that there's ethics and governance and transparency. Sometimes they're trying to avoid monopoly issues or abuse issues. They want fairness, they want public safety, which is always one of the most important things about regulators. Public safety is not usually just about on the health side. It could also be cross-border trade. If we allow people to move products from one country to the other, it could also lead to maybe proliferation of trade. It could lead to maybe counterfeiting. So there are many things that, so sometimes regulators are also thinking around, are you licensed to operate? If we leave the markets open, people can come in, no licenses, no product registration. They come into the market and then they start to play a price game where they want to crash the price at every possible means, because the cost that it takes for you to get licensed or registered and get your product certified by different regulators in the market would also determine what the price benchmarking will look like. So regulators, they play a very critical role. Social standards, financial stability. We want to be sure that people are not, the things that have happened recently in some market like Nigeria, where people come in and ask people to invest their monies. They're not registered with anyone. CBN is not licensed by CBN. The Securities and Exchange Commission don't know about them. And then people's money just disappear based on Ponzi. So building on that, we now need to understand, how should I play? Because if you know what the policies are, you then know how you want to play. So my game usually is that I am engaging with the regulators very early. So from these different organizations I've mentioned in the past that I've worked with, and even now, we're engaging with them to say, what's the policy? And if the policy is not very favorable for business, because some policies are also very anti-business, how do we also start to have roundtable conversations to say, how do we maneuver or how do we manage this kind of policies, because it can stifle business in a way. And then I always have to say, who are like the locals in each of these markets? We need to be talking to legal people. We need to be talking to compliance people. These people understand corporate governance. They also understand the role of compliance, with regulatory compliance. So they advise us on, these are the issues you're going to experience, and this is how you should take it when it comes on board. Then on your go-to-market plan, I always say that you need to have like 2 playbooks. One should be a fast track playbook to say, if things move very fast, are we ready? Because there's also the game of first mover advantage. If you are the first person to come to market when the regulator says the market is ready, you probably are also going to be able to take the larger chunk of the market share. If you come late to the party, you're going to be playing a catch-up game. So I usually would say, have like a dual approach to your go-to-market plans. Have one that is optimized for regulatory uncertainty. And I have a very good example. There's this, what we call the GS1 standard. It's global all across. It's a global standard. Up to medication, they can know exactly the nurse that is dispensing that medication or the pharmacy that is dispensing that medication. And it allows room for recall. That's why your cars, when I was driving a Kia, for example, I got a letter from Kia saying, this vehicle has been recalled for this so reason. they have a way to be able to track to the last mile, to the last end user. Now, the whole idea is that you should be ready to fit yourself into the plan. And I was talking about something that happened recently. There was this GS1 standard that we've been pushing in Nigeria for about 5 years. And I just saw the news last week, or this week actually, and it looks like now everybody's ready. The policymakers, the players in the market, everybody is now ready for that product or that technology to go live, which is already happening in the whole of Europe and the whole of North America. We can know where things are, even to your mobile device. We know who is buying it. Now Nigeria is about to start that. And I remember when we started the conversation, there were a lot of licenses we needed to get. There were trainings we needed to go for. We needed to build a framework for that. And it took 5 years. But in all of these 5 years, I can tell you that the organization is fully ready. They've built the infrastructure. They've built everything that they need. Now that it's going live, some people are going to be playing catch up because they've just been saying, oh, it's something that's going to happen. Maybe it never would happen. So as a business leader, I think you should also have your plan in place. Try to align with your regulators. Make sure that you also bring in local experts in places where you maybe it's not your main region where you played in. So you need to bring in the locals. You need to also be planning different scenarios. For example, there was a time when there was a border closure in Nigeria. That can also become a scenario that nobody ever thought of for those who are exporting and importing. Are there restrictions in terms of import and export? There's also the data residency. Some organizations will say, whatever cloud services you are using has to be domained in our country. We don't want our data to sit in Europe. We don't want our data to sit in the US. We want it to sit in our local markets. So these are some of the things that you also need to be able to take cognizance of when you're trying to build your growth goals, aligning it with regulatory compliance.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. It's quite clear. It's also important that you said you have to work along with the policymakers. You have to work with the organizations, and because these guys could make or mar. And the one thing you also highlighted here is that when you're doing your go-to-market strategy, it has to be two-phased or two-pronged. One focusing on if you scale fast, and one focusing on when things don't go the way you want to go. How would you approach the market? And that just gives you that robustness, so that you, whatever circumstance you find yourself as an organization, or your sales team members find themselves, is important that they are ready to switch or to take on strategies that have been adopted on both prongs, as against left in the middle, asking what to do or being confused. So that is very nice that you also pointed that out. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Yeah, so let's move on to leadership and evolution. Because now this is something that you can relate with, because you have moved from hands-on coaching your sales team, gearing them and energizing them to meet their targets, and now you are leading a role that's the associate VP global growth role. Which, of course, it's a huge feather to the hat, which means, there's a lot of responsibilities. But then again, there's also a mindset shift. I like to say paradigm shift, from, getting these guys energized to, coming up with strategies. So what mindset shift was the most critical for leading through managers rather than doing it all yourself, from rolling your sleeves to do it and, delivering or extending these errands or creating these strategies for your team members to deliver on?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think one of the things that helped me very early in my career was a book by Jim Collins. I think it's the Level 5 Leadership. And it talks about the different leadership stages. So I think Level 5 executive is like the fifth stage, where you're an executive, you're C-suite. But between then, there are like 4 other stages where there is a highly capable individual. These people can do the work that you've asked them to do, and that's all that they can do. Then there is also the contributing team member. This person is bringing value to the team. He doesn't just leave it at his own work. He understands what I'm doing and how does this also define the team goals. So you need to understand where your people are. And then there's a competent manager who is able to now organize people and resources to achieve the set goals of the business. And then the level 4 is, if I still remember very clearly, is somebody who now has a commitment to a clear path and vision to build high-performing teams, and that's where a lot of people will get to in the course of their career. So looking at myself and the things I've done over the years, I think one of the major things that has helped me is I always tell my team that I'm both a player and a coach, because in some organizations, all you just do is direction. But in some organizations, you also have to be somebody who is able to do both. And so my biggest mindset shift first, like I mentioned, looking at the 5 stages of the leadership, was to first recognize that I could lead people effectively and get them to become a high-performing team. But after a while, you also now need to be the one orchestrating the choir. So you will have different leads within the different teams that you're leading. And that now takes me to the place of proximity to influence. Because when you're very close to what is happening, it looks like you're getting involved in everything. But sometimes you also need to be able to step back, and I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. You need to be able to step back and don't get into the operational things anymore. You should be able to trust your people to say, when you say a coach is standing by the sidelines and he's practically telling his people, hey, do this, let's get this done, let's get that done. He's not on the field, he's not the one running around on the field anymore. So that's a place of proximity and influence. You need to be able to stay on the sidelines. You're able to see the big picture. Because if you can't see how all the parts fit together to make the business go forward, then you're still playing in the rings. So you need to be able to step back from getting and I always say there's strategic, tactical, and operational. A leader should play on the strategic level, sometimes at the tactical level, but it shouldn't get down to the operational level where we are coming up with a copy, we are designing the flyers, we're the ones setting up the campaigns, except it's an organization where it's a very small team. And I know that right now, with AI coming to play, everybody thinks that marketing teams, for example, should get a lot smaller. But you need to be able to move from proximity to influence, providing clarity to your team. And when I say orchestration, for example, one of the things I also do is that when I'm also hiring, I'm looking for people who are a lot different from me. I'm not trying to create a replica of myself. As much as I want you to be able to do the things that I do, I want people who are also able to think outside of the box. Are you able to challenge the way we are thinking as an organization? And this is one of the things I always tell people at the point where you're interviewing them. I want to see people who can challenge the status quo. If there's a better way we can do things, I would rather people that can speak up and not people who are just only saying yes, yes, yes to everything. So I'm also checking your kind of personality at the point where I'm hiring you. You must be a fit to the existing team, but you must also be able to bring some form of disruption in a good way to the team. So I look for complementary strengths, and if I identify what the strengths are, one of the other things I do is I do cross-pollination of ideas. For example, the team in LATAM, I'm going to make sure that they're speaking to the team in Africa. So we have weekly meetings where we all are coming together. So are there knowledge blocks that has been built in one market? Maybe we've launched a product that should be coming further down the line in another market. I'm asking people to document it and share their best practices with others. What worked? What did not work? This also allows other people to get ready and anticipate and create scenarios ahead of time to say, if there were challenges like this for this product launch that is coming to my market, maybe in Q4, I need to be ahead of time. What kind of creatives did they use? What kind of campaigns did they build? What kind of personas did they build? So it allows you to be able to drive that collaboration across teams. So not just leading the teams, but you're also trying to make sure that each of the separate teams that are in silos, working in different markets, are also talking to each other. Then I think the most important piece, which is like the last thing I'm going to talk about, is KPIs. We need to also be able to define we have to define our KPIs very early. I let you build your strategy. I let you also determine what the tactics and the operational bit will be. I let you determine what your budget will be. I take all of that to executive leadership for approval. I'm able to set clear objectives and return on the investment to the business, but we need to define what the KPIs are from day one. Each of the managers should be able to own their KPIs. So we set it as cadence, and then we also codify knowledge, like I've mentioned. We cascade the goals. This is what we want to do. These are the KPIs. This is how we're going to get measured. So my job as a growth leader is not just to set the altitude to say this is how far we're going to go, but it's also to set things in motion by showing what kind of actions are we going to take, what kind of behavior are we going to have, what kind of decisions are we going to take, and how do we also see that there is data as the core, the core of everything. So at the end of the day, are we also putting data in our faces to say, how are we doing? When we come to appraisals, and we've set the goals, what kind of data are we also bringing to the table to show that we're actually building enablement? We are moving things, maybe whether it's from MQL to SQL or conversion rate. Are we aligning with sales? How are we doing that? How are we building content for capability and also for enablement? So those are like the things that I would do, and I still do right now. So those are like the kind of mindset shifts that is critical for leaders.
Yes, yes. And one thing that stood out is also, again, is the proximity to influence bit, where as much as possible, try not to micromanage your staff.
Right.
Try not to trying to get your hands dirty to do the work they're meant to do. So give them that free will, give them that enabling environment. And this also stem from getting the right team members. Like you rightly said, it doesn't make sense to hire people that are like you. You want people that can do the job, but you also want people that are also that can think outside of the box, that will be coming with fresh eyes, fresh perspective. That is why you hire people to come in too. Yes, they can do the job, but what experience are you bringing onto the table? How does that differ? I'll give you an instance, where when I got a job recently, I was doing some work. The work was focused on something entirely different, but my industry experience, being able or having worked in multiple jurisdictions, was something that was that stood out for the hiring managers at the point in time. And they said, look, that is what we're looking for. We're looking for people that have sold in multiple jurisdictions, multiple legislations, because that is something that the team currently were lacking. And also the fact that I was coming from, somewhere that was all in the SaaS-based products, fintech adjacent, it was something that also was impressive to them. So that is something that was pulled out from what you just said, where you bring people, yes, that can do the job, but also have a fresh perspective to enable to come in. Yeah.
I wanted to say two things. So sometimes people would say, if I have managers who are not doing the job, I think your job or your role as a leader is to be able to clearly call it out.
Yes.
You need to let people know you're performing below par. I always tell people my job as a leader is not to pat people on their backs. My job as a leader is to tell you the truth. There's a sandwich method where you tell them what they're doing well, tell them what they need to do better, and then also just commend them again. That works. And it depends on the markets where you're operating in. But I know as a global standard, that's the way we should be talking. But sometimes I also see that in some markets, feedback is coming back as suggestions. And this becomes a distraction. If you're not trained to listen very well, you would just assume that feedback is a suggestion. Sometimes the feedback is actually the feedback, but it sounds more like, don't you think, how about? And if you're not careful, it looks like it's a suggestion. And then the last thing I'm going to add to that is, I don't think leaders should shy away from letting people off their teams. You also need to be able to set clear expectations. If people feel that this person is okay getting away with all kinds of things, you are setting a wrong precedent. And then you need to be able to tell people to say, we're going to let this person go because of X, Y, Z reasons. People should not just disappear away from the teams. And I've had somebody that I had in the past where he spent 3 months. And every time I'm saying, hey, so how are we doing with that? So he got on board, we onboarded him, we set the KPIs, we agreed on what should be done. And month 1, how are we doing? I'm working on it. Month 2, how are we doing? I'm working on it. Month 3, how are we doing? I'm working on it. I'm like, you haven't come to me to say, hey, Ola, I'm having issues here. What should I be doing here? You just come to the work office, you sit down, I'm asking you, how are we doing? And I'm working on it. And to be honest, at the end of the probation period, we have to let him go. So I don't think leaders should also shy away from letting people off their team if it's a competence issue. If it's attitudinal, we can retune, we can refine. But if it's a competence issue and other team members are seeing it, they're going to think it's okay, and that becomes a culture. So we also are responsible for building the kind of culture we want to see on our teams.
Spot on. And just to add to it before we move to the next stage, they do say that once you enter a bus or a train and you realize that it's heading to the wrong direction, the quicker you jump off that train, the faster it is for you to retrace. your step.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the further you keep going, the further you are from where you're the destination you want to get to. So that's why it's important for leaders, especially, when you are having, we have to be upfront, like you said, feedback. Look at the demographic and the jurisdiction you're operating in. Your feedback should be, clear, crisp. You need to ensure that they take, whoever is receiving that feedback takes the feedback as what it is and not a suggestion. All right. If you want to come up with a strategy and say, oh yeah, you did this, these are the good things, the few good things you've done, and however, these are the few many bad things you've done. Sometimes they latch on the few good things, but those that practice that are very good with effective listening would understand the message you're trying to portray. So as a leader, you are meant to ensure that after having that conversation with the said staff, the takeaway is that the staff understands what he or she or what they need to do to improve their work and to get closer to the aspirations and objectives of the business at the end of the quarter or the financial year.
Right.
So,
and that's the what we call the performance I've forgotten what we call it now again, but where you're putting people on performance
improvement plans,
where these are the gaps and this is how you can improve. So sometimes you don't necessarily have to let them go almost immediately. You can put them on a performance improvement plan and see how they are faring. If they still are not performing based on what's been agreed, then each party can go their separate ways amicably.
Absolutely. That's great. And just to piggyback on that, looking at future-proofing growth teams, right? Now, looking 5 years into the future, what emerging skills will separate high-impact growth leaders from the rest? And how are you embedding those skills in your organization today?
Okay, so I think the first thing is that AI has come to stay. I think that's one thing every leader should know. The use cases might differ depending on the job functions, but I think AI has come to stay. And for growth teams, I believe that we need to start to think around how do we augment and leverage AI for growth. And don't just think of AI as just a tool. Think of AI as an enablement tool for us. So how do we use AI to scale? So for example, there is a lot of work a lot of people are doing right now with Gen AI, whether it's ChatGPT or the similar ones that we have. So how do we use AI, for example? So for example, I've worked with Jasper AI that allows you to be able to generate content, but you have to train the AI first into what kind of tone of voice do we want to be using? How do we want to sound as a corporate brand? How do we want to sound as a regional brand? How do we want to sound when we get into non-English speaking markets? How do we want to ensure that my concept that I'm giving to you, by the time you are translating it, it is adapting concepts into the market context. Marketers right now are using AI even for video creation versus the traditional way where you have to find a 3D motion graphics guy who is building different videos for you and then doing voiceovers. Now, one video can be built, you push it into an AI tool, it translates it into different languages. It helps you to adapt the context into the cultural context of the markets where you're going into. So I think AI has come to stay. And what we should be thinking around is how do we now start to look at augmenting AI for growth execution? There is also the place where I think growth leaders need to be very strategic with experimentation. Everybody talks about A/B testing, but there is also the place of statistical significance to say that how is this campaign performing as against this campaign? So not just to say, hey, we've run this campaign, we're seeing more users, but you need to be able to bring more data. And that's a place of data fluency. Everybody should be able to speak about data in a way where senior management is going to listen to you. And I tell my team, you can actually be at the risk of the guy who knows how to do the work, but doesn't know how to tell a story around what you're doing. You can bring results to the table, but nobody's going to give you a seat at the table if you're not able to speak the language business executives are speaking. So data is key. You need to be talking about acquisition. You need to be talking about your funnel efficiency. You need to be talking about the velocity of maybe your product launch. You need to be talking about your customer lifetime value. So sometimes I tell my team to say, I'm going to give you these amounts to run this activation or to run this campaign. At the very least, I want you to bring back the cost of this campaign back to me as revenue, not just as GSV. I want you to bring it back to me as revenue, and then we can start to look at the customer lifetime value. So when I'm going to a business to say, I need approval for this, they're going to listen to me, because I'm not just saying I want to bring you money, but I'm telling you I want to bring you this much profitability back to the business. And I'm also saying I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to keep making money on the long term from these accounts. So I think those are also skills that every leader should also have and be trying to also translate into their teams. So everybody must be able to tell a story around data. You must be able to turn insight into action. If you're running a campaign, what is defining how you're doing that? And on my team right now, I've been able to get everybody to talk around data. If you're going into a new city, if you're going into a new market, a new segment, a new category, you need to show me the data. So what's the data saying? External data, internal data. You need to put it together and show and say, this is what the market is saying. We can now start to pick insights and turn that into action. And it's always important, the sales floor also understands what we are trying to do as leaders. We don't just want to leave it at just managers and leaders talking to managers, but who are also down the road, or the guys who are the last mile also understand this story you're telling. You're also able to show them the insights. How is this insight going to also impact the work that they're doing? How does it also change? Sometimes it's just a 10-degree shift, sometimes it's a 5-degree shift. But on the long term, you will see the impact is a lot higher than what we see as of today. So we also need to be able to lead without authority. Sometimes nobody's going to give you the title, but how are you going to lead without authority in terms of influence? How are you influencing the finance team? How are you influencing the product team? How are you influencing the legal team? I think it's also a baseline requirement for the future to say, even when you don't have a title, you should be able to lead. I think that's going to be my last point.
Yeah, successfully put. Lead without authority, storytelling behind data, and of course, harnessing AI. These are key things that many people, especially growth leaders, need to impact on the team. I like the fact that you've started embedding it in your team, where people, if your team members want to get into new systems, new cities, new area, geographic areas, at least the data, they understand what the data speaks, the data speaks of it, and how you can harness that data to drive the impact or the strategies that you want to implement in the such cities. So that's a good one as well. So let's move into sales work stories. This is where we talk about the biggest wins and losses. You have 1 minute for a question. You're going to have 2 questions. So here goes. The first question. Tell us, or can you describe a moment where persistence paid off for you?
Okay, so in 1 minute, I think I would say there was a time when I took over a new region. They split the region into 2. There's been this lady who's always been a top performer, and I was coming to work in a market. So first off, I became competition to her. Second was that everywhere I went, they already knew her. So I had to sit back to say, what parts of this region has she not really worked on? And then I started to comb very new areas. I started to comb new markets, talking to new accounts. And I had an account that I had an opportunity there. I think the deal was just maybe $10,000. It was not a lot of money, to be quite honest, or maybe about $20,000. I can't remember right now the conversion rate. It was not a lot of money, but it took me about 6 months, and it was like my first deal. And I kept going, and they kept telling me, we're going to do this. And I kept going, and I kept hearing, we're going to do this. But I stayed on course. I was able to follow through. And to be quite honest, I think that was a deal that actually helped me become very notable in the business, because people said, oh, wow, we've never had this kind of value of business from a very small account. But it also gave me that resilience to say, if you keep at something for a long time, if you're sure that there's an opportunity there, if you're sure that you've been able to sell value, if you stay at it just consistently and persistently, you probably would you'll break forth. So I think that's my story of persistence. and resilience.
Great one. That's good. And we'll move to the next question. What advice would you give about dealing with losses in sales?
Okay. So I always say that it can be hard, but you need to be able to separate your emotions, the no and the why. If you don't separate your emotions, you are going to get just stuck. So you need to understand, why is this customer saying no? You need to separate that no from the why. They always call it postmortem, where after you've lost the deal, you must first understand, is it that it was an ICP mismatch, for example? Was it that it was a timing issue? Was it a pricing issue? Or could it be sometimes that there's just a friction? I've had accounts where somebody clearly told me, you can't sell into this account. And he said, the MD of this company and the mother of the other guy who is pitching to this business, they've been friends from childhood. There is no way they're going to come in. It's going to be a relationship selling. It's not about the value you're bringing. No matter the value you're bringing, you will never be able to close this account on that basis. So sometimes as salespeople, we always need to understand why we are losing the deal. You can have everything right, but there is a relationship gap that you're not able to bridge because somebody has, and I have many examples where there's somebody who's worked in a multinational, they used to be brand managers together, and then they moved to separate companies, and I went to pitch, and somebody says, you're not going to get this deal. These guys grew up together as brand managers, and now they're now senior leaders in commercial roles within different organizations. Your competition is friends with this other person, and that bias can be there, regardless of how good your product is, but you must learn to understand why. And for each loss, I always say, refine your pipeline scoring, understand objection handling, and also be able to understand the why. I think that's very important.
Great. That's a lot you shared, and that is quite helpful. Especially understanding the why, understanding why the rejection happened, and how to handle objections effectively and positively. Because remember, I keep telling sales colleagues that when people say no, they don't say no to you. They're saying no to the product or no to the timing. It might just be bad timing for them. They don't have the budget, but just how you know. So do not feel bad, like you said. Do your pipeline scoring again, do a reassessment, understand, take some lessons on some, because there's always things to learn. There's always takers. You can take out things from what you've done so far in the past and move on, refine them, and just get going. One of the rituals we do is that on Fridays, once we lose a deal, we just pick up the Fridays after work. We just shred the papers, like the deal communication, and put them in the bin and say, "Look, it's done. We shredded it. Move on next week. Come on, fresh ideas. Come in happy." So that's a ritual that we picked up. So some people can adopt such ritual if if it makes you feel better. But the key thing and the underpin is always remember that no doesn't mean no to you. It just means no to the product. It means no to the timing. It just means no, they don't have the budget. Yeah. Or maybe you mismatched. That could also be cool. You're not speaking to the right customer profile or the right decision maker. These are instances that could happen that would make you have this kind of conversation. So I believe that it is something that we should address. So, well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. So for career advice for top sales tech professionals, that's the final part we're going to be addressing today. So what advice are you going to give people, young graduates, aspiring tech sales people that want to enter tech sales today? So what advice are you going to give them?
Okay, so first thing I would say is find an opportunity to learn. I think that's very important. It doesn't have to be a mentor, maybe just somebody you can, if there's an opportunity that you can just tag along, listen to sales conversations is also very important. That's number one. If you don't have that, then I'll say build a triangle of product fluency. If you would want to sell tech sales or really venture into tech sales, you need to understand the product fluency. First is understand the buyer journey, and then be able to get the kind of knowledge to engage those kind of people over time. So product fluency is one. There's also the place of buyer empathy. By buyer empathy, it's being able to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. What's going to make this buyer listen to me? How am I going to warm up to the buyer? They always say that people buy people first. And it's a very important conversation. You need to make yourself very likable. If you're not, people would buy from people they trust. And for me to trust you, I need to first be able to connect with you. And connecting with you is a place of building trust. So become a trustworthy person. Become somebody that people can also connect with. So you need to become a connector. And it's not about your personality, because a lot of introverts who are doing very well in sales. And then you also need to understand the place of pipeline consistency. By pipeline consistency, you are now being able to understand how the pipeline flows, because they call it a pipeline. It flows. Some people call it a funnel because it flows. You must understand your pipeline consistency and build pipeline consistency. Be able to move opportunities from one, accelerate and velocity. Be able to move an opportunity from one stage to the other. Understand what it takes to be able to move your opportunities down the road. Now, usually people say that tech sales is not about who is the loudest or the loudest closer. It's about becoming a trusted translator of value. How are you selling value to your customer? What does your customer really think is value to them? And then you need to be able to connect with them. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to connect with your buyer. Find something. Maybe the person is a lover of Premier League or Champions League, and you want to find out what the person's football club is. All you need to do is go to their social media pages, whether it's on LinkedIn or the everyday social media accounts. Find something to connect with that person first, and that will allow you to open up the conversation. You then will build the trust, understand your product, because if I give you access and you can't talk to me in the way where you're communicating value, you've lost me. So yeah. I think that would be it for me.
Yeah, that's great, because it's always good to get value. I'll call them the icebreakers. Get an icebreaker that would make you, get into a different room with the prospects. It's imperative to do that, because many a times, prospects, like you said, would buy from people, not necessarily products. And if they do like you, or they have some emotional connection with you, it makes the job of selling easier. Most importantly, when you find that icebreaker, it's imperative that you also sell value. Itemize that value, speak out that value, communicate that value in the manner in which would be understood and well interpreted and accepted by the prospects that you're talking to. So those are the key things that is there. So yeah. Then moving on, the final question for this session will be: how do you balance short-term sales goals with long-term career objectives?
Okay, thanks again for that question. I would say from my experience, your long-term objectives should be growing up the ladder, becoming a manager, becoming a leader on the long term, but you also need to become a closer in the short term. So I would always say it's a test of skills and a test of strategy. So deliver today's numbers, build a personal brand as a closer, because even if you're moving across industries, people are going to go and ask questions to say, this guy is trying to come in here. What's been his experience working with you? So you want to first build that trajectory, or you want to build that history of somebody who understands how to close deals.
Yes.
That's the short-term goal as a salesperson. Deliver today's numbers. But while you're doing that, you also need to start to build your personal brand. Are people knowing you within your organization? Are you building that influence, which I spoke about, being able to influence multiple business functions without having a title? You also need to be able to do that. You need to also be able to learn new verticals. And across my career, I've moved from pharmaceutical sales. I moved on to core technology, where I was selling Polycom and Cisco and Avaya to the financial industry. And then I moved on to selling medical equipment, where one equipment was as much as 50,000, I would say about $1 million, $2 million was about the cost of one equipment. It could be as high as that. So you also need to be able to learn across multiple verticals, because sometimes these things will piece up together. And then when an opportunity surfaces, you are the right guy because you have experience across multiple verticals. You also need to be able to shadow product and marketing if you're in sales. For example, when I was at Sproxel, I made sure that each of my sales team members understood the role of marketing. Because at some point we now started to sell a MarTech product, and you can't sell a MarTech product just going with a sales mindset. You need to understand how your product is helping another marketer to deliver their business objectives. So you need to find your way around building a personal brand, delivering your numbers, learning new verticals, shadowing multiple products. As a product marketer, you need to understand how product marketing is helping you as a salesperson. How is the product team also building their product? Because when you start to engage, you're talking about product roadmaps, because you probably might be talking to a CTO of another organization, and your conversation has to be very technical based. So understand the product, shadow the product team as much as you can, and then you definitely will get promoted. Your numbers will speak for you, but you should also advocate for yourself. I tell people, find a sponsor within the organization, somebody who can also speak for you. Whether an opportunity comes within the organization or outside of the organization, you are then able to grow within the ranks. And then people are going to be checking your career trajectory to say, what was the experience working with you? Attitudinal wise, numbers wise, product wise, you need to be able to build all of that. And then your personal brand is what's going to eventually sell you. So also put yourself out there, find platforms where you can talk to a larger audience and put a personal brand around of yourself. So I think that's how I'm going to wrap it up, Wilson. Thank you.
Well, yeah, this has been very, very educative, and exciting, because, you touched on multiple points, multiple aspects, and you brought everything together from the marketing point of view to the sales point of view. Ola, thank you for making this quite educative. So, if the listeners and the viewers would like to connect with you or reach out to you, are you available on LinkedIn? How can they reach out to you?
Yes, I'm available on LinkedIn. You can find me as Olaoluwa, in brackets Ola Ayesa. Ayesa is spelled Ayesa. I'm very happy to connect with everybody. Just send me an email. I always reply to all my messages on LinkedIn. So be rest assured, I'm going to definitely respond.
Absolutely. So Ola's LinkedIn profile will be on the show notes. Do well to go to his page, comment, connect. You've listened to him. He's given a lot of information, useful information. I'm sure if you are coming in to the sales ecosystem, starting from an account manager or just trying to know more about sales, Ola will be able to give you more insights. And if looking at it from the marketing point of view, he is your go-to guy. So that would be all for me today. Ola, any last words before we call it a day?
Well, I just want to say thank you again to all of our listeners. And I will just end with this Spartan quote to say that one of the major things is becoming a trusted translator of value. And somebody once told me that value is what the audience defines as value. So you must always understand what your audience defines as value before they can call it valuable. So always find out what my audience calls valuable and then offer that value, then they can call it valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. That's become a valuable translator of value. That is, very solid nuggets. I would say words of marble. Thank you, Ola, for this. Thank you for your time. And thank you all for listening and tuning in today. See you on the next one. From me, it is thank you and bye-bye.